4 days until Election Day. We'll get back to all your calls and comments here just momentarily. Joining me is Frank Gaffney, Jr., President and founder of the Center for Security Policy, a foreign affairs and security policy expert, author and columnist at the Washington Times and townhall.com, and host of SecureFreedomRadio.com. Frank, thanks so much for joining us this morning. How are you?
I'm great, Gary. Good morning. How are you?
Really good. Every time we bring this up, when we bring up Benghazi or Libya, I'll get tons of emails from, President Obama supporters that will say this is a totally partisan issue. And I thought to myself, I said, before I talk to Frank, I'm just going to jot down a few questions of how, if to take partisanship out of this completely, because this is now part of popular culture. If Jay Leno's talking about it, it means it's made it into the popular culture. So I started thinking to myself, if I take all partisanship out of it, how would the average American look at it right now? What would their questions be? And I came up, there's probably more, but I came up with these three questions. Security for the consulate in Libya was a problem. We know that. Why did we not provide the proper security assets? That would be question number one. Question number two, was there a call for help that was ignored? By whom and why? And number three, why didn't we get a straight answer? All right, don't even call it a lie. Why did we get at the beginning so much misleading information, so many assumptions that were made, so much cherry picking what they were going to say at, whether it's the State Department or whether it was, I can't think of his name, the president's spokesperson here. And why aren't we getting straight answers now? Why does it seem like there is a cover-up? I think average Americans are asking those questions right now. What, you think I'm close?
Well, I think you're not only right on, they're the right questions. And they're questions that we as Americans are entitled to have answers to, irrespective of who's in the White House. You can bet that if it were George Bush or Mitt Romney, for that matter, and these sorts of issues, shall we say, had arisen, you'd have people, I think, on both parties asking precisely the same question. So should we go through them in turn?
Yes. Yeah.
First of all, I think there's a misunderstanding that we have been operating under for some time, and I must confess I've been guilty of it myself because I've been passing on what we've been told. The diplomatic compound in Benghazi is in two parts. There was a main compound, and then there was an annex, as they call it, a few blocks, half a mile away or so. Mile and a half, I guess it is, away. These did not constitute a consulate. We have no consulate in Benghazi, according to the official rosters of the State Department. These were places where we had ostensibly diplomatic immunity, and we certainly had persons like the ambassador coming in and out of them. But apparently, what they were being used for was very different than, consular activities, which typically are, giving people visas and that sort of thing. What they were being used for, it appears, is collecting weapons that had been widely disseminated all over Libya when Muammar Gaddafi's regime was overthrown. He had this immense number of weapons caches, including not only automatic and semi-automatic weapons, AK-47s and the like, and rocket-propelled grenades, but also what are known as man pads, shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles that are deadly, particularly against low-flying aircraft, including civilian airliners. And we obviously had a very powerful interest in trying to get those policed up. The reason I make this point, Gary, is that one of the reasons why there was not more security at these particular facilities was evidently the idea was to try to keep them with a relatively low profile. You put, a lot of fortifications around them. You might have modestly improved their security, but you would have certainly called a lot of attention to them. I think that was part of the calculation, is it sort of camouflaged them by just having them blend in to the surrounding area. It didn't work. The folks around, including some who were working for our mission to protect it, the so-called February 17th Martyrs Brigade, knew exactly what was in there and what was going on, including, by the way, meetings like the one Christopher Stevens, our U.S. ambassador to Libya, had the night of September 11th, the night he was killed, with the Turkish consul general. Now, this brings us to the second part of your question. When the attack began, after the Turkish consul general left, and Christopher Stevens and the others in that those two facilities were under attack, first at the main compound and then subsequently at the annex, you bet there were cries for help. And in fact, there were cries for help before the attack began. There were cries or formal diplomatic cables and other emails and requests for improved security, given what was happening in Benghazi and elsewhere around Libya, namely the total collapse of anything remotely like a security condition consistent with Americans operating there safely. They were denied, no question about it. They were denied before the attack began, and as best we can tell, serial requests for help once the attack was underway, including from these two Navy SEALs, former Navy SEALs, were denied. And this brings us to the third part of your question. I believe there have been a series of lies about this whole operation from the beginning. I think in part it was to cover up what was going on. As I say, it wasn't just that they were having these meetings and so on in this facility. They were actually collecting weapons. But the real purpose of this endeavor, I think, which has really not gotten the kind of attention that's needed, certainly not before the election, is that those weapons were being sent on, some of them at least, through the people at this facility, through the Turks, with the help of the Qataris, with the help and financing of the Saudis, to people in what's known as the Syrian opposition. In other words, we have been arming the Syrian opposition covertly, secretly, just as previously we armed the Libyan opposition. In fact, some of the same people, including a fellow by the name of Belhaj, a very dangerous Islamist tied to Al-Qaeda, was one of the people we were working with in Libya. He moved to Syria, and Ambassador Christopher Stevens was apparently working with him to arm people there. Now, this is really the kicker, the most central question that cries out for investigation, that the American people are absolutely entitled to know, is were we in fact, by this secret pipeline out of Benghazi, moving not just humanitarian assistance but armaments, sending them to Al-Qaeda in Syria? And I believe the answer to that is yes, and I think the reason we've been systematically, repeatedly, and through a variety of different channels and different ways lied to about this whole episode has been to try to conceal that this was an Iran-Contra scandal or a Fast and Furious scandal on steroids, gun running not just to the Muslim Brotherhood, but to Al-Qaeda.
Okay, where do you get this information from?
This information has been trickling out from a lot of different sources, some of it people inside the government, the intelligence community. Fox News has reported some of it. They're practically alone in the mainstream media, if we'll call them that now. There's been a lot of reporting by intrepid investigative reporters and bloggers, and one of my colleagues, Claire Lopez, a former career CIA officer. These are dots that still remain to be fully connected, Gary, but I don't think there's any question that that's what we'll see emerge here. Probably, if the administration has its way, if the rest of the mainstream press has its way, not until after the election. But that's what's going to come out, I think, and it will be a scandal that will rock our government and our government's, the confidence of its people.